Commissioner Gorelick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the three of you for being here today and for sharing your thoughts with us. We have a fair amount of firepower on this panel, and I have a lot of questions, but I know my fellow commissioners do as well, so I'll try to pick the most important ones from my point of view. And this is a question for all three of you. I was struck, Attorney General Barr, by your very strong defense of the Bureau as the appropriate agency to have the lead. And you say in your prepared statement that there are three basic criticisms of the FBI which it is addressing. The one that I was struck by was the middle one, where you say that the FBI failed to exchange information with other elements of the intelligence community, and that it is addressing that failure or that criticism. But what I hear from Mr. MacGaffin and Mr. Hamre is that they wouldn't say that that's the right question. And so this is the second part of my question, is to the two of you. Because the way you pose the question, it is not did they share the information they had, but did they cooperate with others in setting the strategic goals of collection and go out together with the other relevant agencies, primarily in the intelligence community, to seek out the right information domestically. And so my first question is whether the three of you would comment on that. That is, what is it that is the failure, if you will, and how are we going about addressing that failure? And if you could be brief, because I have a number of follow-ups, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I do think one of the failures was the failure to have in place, develop, foster intelligence collection as a function distinct from building criminal cases with criminal predicates. And I also think it was a failure not to have an analytical capability. And a lot of the sharing problems were caused by, in my view, ill-conceived constraints on law enforcement and the sharing of intelligence information. In terms of the setting of the target, it's true that intelligence collection is different than gathering, and it should be focused, and there has to be some agreement as to what the end is. But I also think we can get a little carried away here, because a lot of this counterterrorism intelligence domestically within the United States has a somewhat of a tactical flavor to it. In other words, it is focusing on groups and elements. It's not sort of sitting back and saying, where's the next threat coming from? And, you know, is this a breeding ground for terrorists over here in this part of Africa or what have you? That's CIA's function. But the function of sort of protecting the homeland when groups get into the United States has a certain operational tactical flavor to it. And I'm not sure that you know, it's the same as sort of doing national intelligence estimates and sitting around figuring that, you know, I don't think it takes that long to figure that out, frankly.
I certainly agree that the failure to share is not the heart of the problem and the most egregious problem. There was, to follow my argument, not very much to share in any event. The problem is there's still, 2 years later, is not much more to share. I'm told, for instance, that the disseminated the information that is produced by the FBI's 56 field offices to be disseminated to other parts of the government has, the good news is, has increased fourfold in that 2-year period. The bad news is it now averages 4 pieces of disseminated intelligence a day, in distinction to 450 by DIA or some of the others. So numbers are the wrong way to look at it, but there's a problem here. But it is a failure, not the failure to share so much as the failure to acquire the right information. And while I agree with Attorney General Barr that the national estimate approach, you know, where's the next bad thing going to come from, ain't too hard. That's not the kind of work, it's hard to get right, but it's not too hard to sort of say it's going to come from that disadvantaged part of the world or another. But the work that has to be done is not that sort of intellectual, it's hard, tactical penetration work to have your spy sitting next to the spy in the bin Laden mountaintop and in the bin Laden cell in Cincinnati, if you will, over long periods of time. So I don't accept that I don't agree that it's tactical in the sense of we'll get a little snippet here and there and we'll put them together. It's long-term, hard work to get the right people in the right places to obtain over time the right information about those who wish us harm.
Very quickly, September 11th really transformed this world so dramatically. I mean, the willingness of the intelligence community and the law enforcement community to share information is really unprecedented compared to my recollection. I mean, I've been around 25 years looking at it. It's unbelievable how much stronger the sentiment of collaboration is right now. On September 12th, I was asked to go up to an emergency meeting of an advisory board for one of the intelligence agencies that I try to help. And I can remember at the time, we said we only had one, maybe two pieces of intelligence in all the files that we thought were relevant. 6 months later, we had lots more information. And what that tells me is that the way you change your filters, that we look at the data, gives you a sense if there's a lot more or a lot less that you're looking at. And of course, an event tends to change your perception of what you're looking for. You want to proactively anticipate that and try to properly tune your filters before something happens rather than after it happens, where you have 100% certainty. That's a very problematic question, of course, how to do that. But I do think it is a matter of mindset. And I think we clearly missed September 11th because for whatever reason, our collective policy intelligence minds weren't tuned to look the right way, even though there probably should have been plenty of evidence that we should have. I think we collect a lot of information. I think a lot of it is frankly pretty useless. We could probably extract a lot of intelligence out of the information that we have that we aren't currently processing, again, because our filters aren't designed right, our mental filters aren't designed right. After you go through that process, then you say, but where are there gaps that I think we should intentionally go out and create facts? And that, I think, needs to be a joint process. I think the spirit of collaboration is now present like it's never been before. But frankly, the competencies and the mechanisms of cooperation don't really yet exist.
Well, let me follow up on that, because it seems to me that the central theme that we have heard over and over again is that there is not a common strategy between domestic and foreign law enforcement. And while Attorney General Barr, I take your point very well, particularly given my own experience in the Department of Justice, that there are big dangers in separating out the people who do domestic collection from the prosecutors who might have to act on it. Nevertheless, what we now see is a proliferation of coordination points with no one discernible to us that can be identified as setting the strategy. So you have the counterterrorism centers at both the FBI and the CIA, both of which have members of the other. You have the Defense Department with its own unit. You have the new TTIC that's been stood up. You have the terrorist screening function newly at the FBI, and then you have the Department of Homeland Security also standing up its own function. And so my question to you, if you will, old hands, is would you structure it this way? And if not, how would you structure it? I understand, Attorney General Barr, you view the notion of an MI5 as not a good one. But what would you do with this proliferation and seeming lack of direction? And I'd like all three of your answers on that.
Well, I don't know about seeming lack of direction. I assume that the Director of Central Intelligence would be providing overall intelligence direction, but I don't necessarily think proliferation of fusion centers or even analytical centers is necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes intelligence has to be reworked, repackaged, re-examined from the standpoint of the operational mission of a particular agency. For example, Homeland Security, I view as a static defense agency. The FBI, in my view, is dynamic. That is, the FBI's job is to proactively go after and dismantle and destroy these groups as they come into the United States. Whereas the Homeland Security is static defense of infrastructure, borders, and so forth. They may need to take a look at the intelligence from the standpoint of what it means for them to have to do. Whereas the FBI, launching attacks against these organizations, may want to take a look at the intelligence from its mission. It's very much the situation. We have a CIA, but that doesn't mean we take intelligence out of DOD. It doesn't mean we take we may have DIA, but it doesn't mean we take intelligence out of the Navy. So I'm not disturbed by the proliferation of fusion or analytical centers.
And I agree that there is a question of who's in charge of the common strategy, and I think that despite, as Dr. Hamre says, the willingness to collaborate and cooperate is infinitely greater than it's been before. The actuality of it is not there, number one. And what makes it even harder is that, and why you have to have someone in charge, and it straddles this divide we're talking about of law enforcement and intelligence, is it isn't as neat as it's in the United States, therefore the FBI will deal with that. For instance, and this will be perhaps a bit questionable, but the notion of the fellows in Lackawanna, the 6 alleged terrorists who were arrested there, the decision that was made to proceed with arrest and criminal prosecutions of those 6. My personal view is that their most serious infraction was they went to the wrong summer camp. They should have gone to Lake Winnipesaukee rather than Lake Tora Bora. They were not truly terrorists. But leaving that aside, the right resolution, instead of 6 in prison, was probably 4 of them sent to their rooms and 2 of them somehow sent back to the Yemen to spy for us within that organization, the Al-Qaeda organization, to find out what's about to happen to us. That decision is because, going to your point of no one how are we in charge across this divide, not that no one's in charge, I don't mean that, but across this divide, that decision is not made. What is in the national interest? Send them to their room and back to the Yemen, or to send them to jail?
So your view, just so I can understand with some clarity here, your view is a decision to prosecute in that circumstance, or one analogous to that circumstance, should not be made at the Justice Department, but because the Justice Department's tools, if you will, are focused on prosecution, but rather jointly across the national security spectrum, because one of the things you might want to do is re-infiltrate someone like that.
That's exactly correct.
And that would be analogous to the way we would treat a spy, for example.
For example, and I think that recently the trend with the more active involvement of AUSAs in the terrorist task force, joint terrorist task forces, that decisions on the ground tend to be the weight of their presence pushes things to the law enforcement side of the boat, making it very difficult for the FBI agent and these special agent to make the decision to develop long-term, difficult penetrations of these organizations that will do us harm. And it's just the weight of they're on that side of the boat, the boat's tipping in that direction, and that's not how you get at this problem.
I'll be very brief. My worry is not that we have no direction, but that our only direction is to prevent exactly the same circumstances that caused September 11th. I mean, that's what's tying us up in knots right now. I think we need to separate the issue of gunsmithing from marksmanship. I mean, I think what we're really lacking is a coordinating mechanism for the marksmanship questions. What are we trying to stop? What are we trying to hit as a goal? What are we trying to stop? And what we've created for mechanisms of coordination are gunsmithing mechanisms. You know, how do we get the FBI and the CIA to share databases in the TTIC? I mean, The TTIC is, I support it, but I think it's not going to do what we really need to have done, given the way it's currently constituted. There needs to be a coordination at a much higher level, government-wide, that represents the strategic thinking of the government about the problem, not the tactical manipulation of the boxes inside the
And
government.
who should do that?
Well, my personal view is that this is, I do not agree with the notion that there is a domestic security that's separate from a national security. I don't think that it makes sense to have a National Security Council and a domestic or a Homeland Security Council. I think that makes no sense. I think there is a national security imperative with a venue that's in a foreign sector and a venue that's in a domestic sector. I would put it under that rubric, and I would frankly have the analytic leadership come from that quarter with the intelligence community and under the DCI leading this strategic question. But always the mechanism of action has to be under the supervision of the Attorney General, in my view.
So the overarching direction would come from the intelligence community, and the execution
Through the National
domestically
Security Council.
would come about in the, somewhere within the Department of Justice.
Yes.
Mr. MacGaffin, you draw a somewhat, strike somewhat, you draw a bleak picture of our capacities, both from the data point, which suggests that even today, in terms of distributed intelligence, very little of it relative to what is being distributed is coming from our domestic agencies, to are not honoring our intelligence officers within the FBI, to the failure to create an intelligence career track. In your heart of hearts, do you believe that the Bureau, even with the energy that is being applied to this effort by Director Mueller, can do this, can do what needs to be done?
I'm not sure, and I've spent, as you know, 6 years as senior advisor to the director and the deputy director. I found the similarities between the CIA and the FBI in terms of, type A, point into the stick guys who really want to get it done. I mean, I desperately want it to work that way, but there have to be some significant changes in the way it goes about its work relative to this very issue. So it's got everything going for it. It's got I believe we have sufficient authorities. It's got the tools, but we've got to somehow turn this corner that we've all been talking about here and concentrate on penetration of those who would do us harm. The Tom Powers analogy of the job here is to determine where the danger lies seems to me to be the most important part, and we're not doing that appropriately.
Secretary Hamre, you said that your confidence, if you will, that the FBI can do this is provisional. How long is provisional?
Well, there's no question that the director really has made it his priority. He certainly communicated that to the Bureau. There are some small but very bright shining lights inside the Bureau that are starting to emerge. I think it's, the prevailing day-to-day culture does not embrace his vision. There needs to be an assessment, an objective assessment about how well he's doing. I think this is very hard because he's very confident it's going to work because his vision is right. And I think his vision is right. I remember being in government. I mean, you are so isolated when you're in government because the first thing you hear in the morning when you walk in is somebody saying, "Boy, you had a good day yesterday, Mr. Secretary." And last thing you hear is, "Boy, you really kicked butt today." Just everybody around you is telling you what a great job you did, and your situational awareness of your own organization is really quite limited. And trying to find a way to help the director get a sense is this working or not? And is it really getting at the cultural imperatives that really motivate your average special agent who comes in every day? That's, I think, a harder question. I'm new to the law enforcement community, so I would not want to render judgment about how to do that. I know how we do it in the military, but I would not know how to exactly do it here. But I think that there needs to be a very supportive but self-critical look at how well this is going.
General Barr, you supervised the FBI as Deputy Attorney General and as Attorney General for as long as most, if not all, of your predecessors. And you detail in your written statement and as well as in your testimony the number of regulatory and legislated and cultural barriers to the FBI being the kind of organization that Mr. MacGaffin and Secretary Hamre are describing as necessary. What is your level of confidence that the Bureau can do what needs to be done?
Well, I have a high level of confidence that the Bureau can evolve into precisely the kind of counterterrorism agency we need domestically. But let me just say that I think we're going to be attacked again. I think we're going to be attacked probably several times very successfully, and we can't do anything about that. I think every agent, every employee of the United States government acting in absolute good faith and acting very competently, and still the nature of this danger and the problem we face is such that we're not going to be able to catch every terrorist that comes in the United States to do us harm. And so, I think that we shouldn't underestimate the magnitude of the problem we have here. And the other thing is, I think we're actually getting a little bit too down on the FBI here. Yes, they in my view, because of external restraints, did not develop the kind of domestic intelligence collection that we now want them to have, and didn't sit around setting up analytical centers to analyze intelligence about people within the United States. And there was a time where if they tried to do that, they would be slapped down in good order. Now we want them to do it, and they will develop it and do a good job on it. But the fact of the matter is that before 9/11, the Justice Department was developing a lot of information about al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, developed more information than MI5 had, developed more information and gave it to the British than MI5 had about Osama bin Laden's activities in Britain. So, the department wasn't doing that bad a job. Other agencies had problems as well as the FBI. If we're going to penetrate these organizations, they're not going to be penetrated initially by the FBI in the United States. They're going to be penetrated overseas, as you say, on a mountaintop in Afghanistan or somewhere. That's not the FBI's job. That's the CIA's job. So, our intelligence agencies have failed occasionally. They didn't get it right necessarily. The FBI has problems. We're trying to fix that. But we also shouldn't raise the bar here to a degree that, and create expectations that we're going to be able to stop every terrorist that tries to kill Americans. We're not going to be able to do it.